Hey, this is Rob Anspach, and welcome back to another edition of E-Heroes for those keeping count. This is episode 312. Yes,
What?
312. And my next guest
Wow.
has been on several times, but today we're going to be talking about awakening the nation because honestly, not only does this nation need awakened, but my next guest has a podcast called Awaken the Nation. And my God, some of these guests are phenomenal. So we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to welcome Brad Szollose back to the show. And, you know, I just saw your last episode drop. Belinda Carlisle. Seriously?
Yep.
How did you
Yeah.
get her on your show?
What Brad's doing is tremendous. It's amazing. Yeah, it's funny. For those of you listening who want to be podcasters, Rob and I, Rob's been on my show like three times as well. So we have this banter and stuff, and I just love having fun. So for those of you who are listening, go get a pen and
That
some
was
paper because
fun.
we're gonna be dropping some great knowledge here. I'm working on my Trump impersonation because it's tremendous. I'm Neo.
I like your
I
walking
dodged. I
impersonation,
dodged a
though.
bullet. Yeah. Wow. Uh, I want you, those of you who want a podcast, I want you to realize it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you've seen this, Rob. I know people out here in Las Vegas. Uh, they probably spent 40 grand to fix up their garage and buy all the equipment, and they have no followers yet. They haven't even launched. So
Well,
all I can
I
say
like the
is,
people who will spend a whole year developing podcast episodes and then put it behind a paywall and make people pay for it. And I'm like, who is paying to listen to your podcast? Put it out there for
yeah,
free.
it's it's someone who believes their own hype, and you can never ever believe your own marketing or your own hype because it's a load of hooey. But anyways, you asked how I got famous guests, how I get these amazing guests, and I have to thank a couple of people. One is Linda Swindling, and Linda Swindling is a good friend, and I've recommended her on several podcasts. She's been on mine, but Linda uh, uh, wrote a couple of books on how to negotiate and how to ask for what you really want. And she basically told the story of how she wanted to get a picture with Jay Leno, and she did what everybody does in the crowd. She asked that first question, and then she's about to warm up to say, "Hey, can I get a picture with you?" And he moved on. And her disappointment was so great. She realized, I should just get to the point right away. And Jay saw her disappointment. He goes, "Hey, you wanted a picture, didn't you?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, she asked." So the other woman got a picture. And from that moment on of meeting Linda, this is like a decade ago, I said to myself, you know what? What is the worst that could happen if I reached out to someone and said, "Hey, do you think Dog the Bounty Hunter would be on my show?" Or, "Hey, do you think Stephen M. R. Covey might want to do my little tiny show?" And it just started to snowball from there. And that's how it started. But the bigger picture is Paul Guyon called me yesterday, and we were talking about his podcast. And he said, "You do such a tremendous job." And I said, "Well, Paul, it didn't start out that way." I said, "You're seeing the end result of 40 years of me being on stage doing morning announcements at my high school. Big shout out to Lebanon Senior High there in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, right down the road from you, Rob." um, I did morning
Yeah,
announcements
it's right over by
there.
the hill.
A big shout out to PJ Landers, who had a show called Politically Incorrect on the local cable station there in New York City, Manhattan News Network, I think it was called. And he asked me to guest host. And Rob, I sucked. So I sucked, but I wasn't going to give up. And that's what I want everybody to know. You're going to develop a formula for your show. You're going to get on your high horse and think, I'm hot stuff after 10 episodes. You're going to do all the mistakes I made. I sucked. And all I learned from doing that live show every Wednesday at 11:30 was prepare, prepare, and have guests that are interesting. So I'm not mocking PJ. I love PJ, but PJ would only have comedians on his show. And when I would sit in, I had a friend from the DA's office who worked with the mayor. I got a Russian immigrant who was a rocket scientist over in Moscow. You know, I'm like, and then I'd have a comedian on for some witty banter who is politically connected. And that formula kind of made me realize, okay, we're gonna have a really good show here if we have a variety of opinions. That's number one. And then through the years, I was asked to be a guest on podcasts, either as a host or a guest. And I don't know about you, Rob, but I got tired of some of these bloated, successful entrepreneurs who would just sit there and go, "Do you know how successful I am? I'm so successful." And I'm just like, how about your alcoholism that you overcame? And they wanted to avoid all those stories. And I didn't want to avoid those stories. I wanted to know, how the hell did you get up in the morning? When you lost everything. And so I went along for years and did other podcasts. And one day, Tony Rubleski actually asked me to sit on a panel with Ben Gay III, who's a big sales guru, and
I've
Jim
had both of
Palmer,
those
who
on the podcast.
yeah, you've had both these guys on your show. Jim Palmer gets on,
Have Jim
and
on.
yeah, Jim is great. They're both good friends. And what happened is, I'm thinking, why in the hell am I on this panel with these really famous guys who are making, big money? And Ben started the conversation about a death of a loved one, and he still had to get up and go to work. And I was like, oh, so that's how we're going to start this. It wasn't a money, like, do you know how much money I made? And here was the secret. And then Jim jumped in and he started talking about how he lost his dream job, and he also got diagnosed with skin cancer in the same week, and then couldn't get any work for 18 months. And so he was forced to become an entrepreneur. And I thought, what am I going to talk about? How I broke my ankle at band camp? What am I going to talk about? And I brought up that I was almost deaf as a kid. I had ear
What?
infections and stuff. And so, yeah, funny guy. And so, um, I sat there in the middle of this and I said, this is the conversation I want to have. This is the conversation that has meat in it.
Mhm.
And so when I finally decided to do my podcast, we launched in 2019, and we're on season 8, and I'm up to 174 episodes. And I've had everybody on from Dog the Bounty Hunter, as we talked about before. Belinda
Mhm.
Carlisle just dropped. I also have had Stephen M.R. Covey on, Dan Millman, who they made his book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, into a movie with Nick Nolte. I've had Panache Desai on, just a plethora of very famous people. I've had 3 people from The Secret, including Joe Vitale, Dr. Joe Vitale, and James Arthur Ray. And
And did
I
they
I
actually
just try
reveal
to
the secret?
yeah, they did. What's not in the secret is this, and so we had a lot of fun. But for those of you who are like, well, how can I get a famous guest on? I'll give you 2 pieces of advice. Start where you can start. When I started my podcast, I had a mixture of semi famous people, friends who were doing extraordinary things, and some people who were, recommended to me who were really out there doing, like, I mean, some people would call it crazy, but I wanted people to understand, the premise of my show, Awakened Nation, is I interview outliers and game changers who've fallen down mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. And
Was
when
I
they
the
got back
mentally?
up, yeah, yeah. And when they got back up, they had to live life completely differently. So, I found that was a better conversation. And so, that first season, I had on a guy who was smoking 50 cigarettes a day. And he was a nuclear physicist, and he wound up running marathons and doing Ironman competitions after that to turn his life around. I had Bob Berg on, the author of the Go Getter. I had Geraldine Orozco, who was in a documentary about the UFO hybrid program, which was like, whoa. And I had on Michael Howell, who's a conspiracy theorist, wrote some pretty intriguing books, and he did research from a different perspective. He actually worked in the government and wrote policies for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And so he brought to bear truth instead of just, hey, we didn't go to the moon. He didn't talk about stuff like that. He talked about, here's the policy they're putting in place to control you. Who else did I have on that first season? I had a woman from the LGBTQ community. I had all kinds of guests. And, in that beginning, Rob, you're going to laugh. A lot of friends reached out to me and they're like, what is your show about? Like they couldn't grasp what I was doing because I didn't want a business show.
Yeah,
I wanted a show that had extraordinary conversations. That's what I wanted to have.
when I started eHeroes in 2018, I pulled in people I knew, some people I didn't know. But for me, the biggest thing was to not throw my judgment in to people that I thought were a lot of, woo woo or
Yeah.
wackadoos. And I'm thinking, what is this person going on about? And I had to bite my tongue. It's like, let him just speak, let him talk,
Yeah.
and a few from that very first year um, are no longer in business. You know, um, I think one went to jail. One's dead. You know, um,
Hey, it happens.
it does, and you look back going, okay, yeah, I'm going to learn from this. I changed a few things. I brought on
Yeah.
people I thought were a little bit more eclectic,
Mhm.
a little bit more. I can't say more well known, but they had a little bit more following. You
Yeah.
know, although I did bring people in that it was their first time on a podcast because I thought that the
Really?
information that they had was, needed to be out there.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's interesting when you start interviewing people, you're gonna see this for those of you who are taking notes. A lot of times the famous guests, you don't get any traction. You don't get any as much as you would think you would. You're like, "Wait, they have 365,000 followers. Why am I not getting more
because they're not
likes and
sharing the
reviews?"
content out.
Right. They ask them to share the content. Now, I've had something extraordinary happen on YouTube. I had 28,000 people view Dog the Bounty Hunter, that episode. And here's the funny part about that show is I never shy away from religion or spirituality, but this one really went into the Jesus realm. And I'm okay with that. I'm not upset with that, but it really went down that road deep. And I just went with it. I
Mhm.
figured whatever. Some people think it's my best episode ever. I'm like, okay, I only asked four questions, and the two of them, him and his wife, they just went off for an hour and a half. My longest episode, it's 90 minutes. I swear to God. I'm like, what? Wait, what? You know, uh, I interviewed one guy who thought he was a great storyteller. And he was a good friend, so we were hanging out, and I was cracked open a bottle of wine, and I just sat down. And I go, "Hey, I want to interview you about your adventures on a mountain or two." He was an adventurer, scuba diving, treasure seeking, all this nonsense, and I couldn't cut the tape off, or the recording off because he spoke for like 3 hours, because we're just hanging out by the fire. And then when I went to edit, I'm like, for the love of God, he is the most boring storyteller ever. So I had to edit that thing for like 2 weeks to figure out if I had to move something to the front or to the back, because as we started drinking a little more, the stories got a little more looser and better. So you're gonna have guests like that where you think, man, this is gonna be a great interview, and then they turn out you got to drag them through the mud. And then some people you're gonna interview, and you're just shocked they have such a great story.
Mhm.
Uh, the second thing I wanted people to know is this: Before I say what the second part is I lived in New York City for 35 years, and I was in different professions, from comedy and auditioning for movies and television to business, and took a company public. So I have a spectrum, a beautiful palette of people from all over the place. And so when I call up a friend who was, I was in comedy with, they have an HBO special, and I'll just say, "Hey, do you want to be on the show?" They're like, "Hell yeah, Brad!" And they come and they go on the show because we're friends. We're
Mhm.
friends, and I help them write some of their beginning act. I help them get paid when they no one would hire them. So I have this incredible stable of people I consider friends that I can call up on a dime and just say, "Hey, do you want to do the show?" And here's my advice to people. This is part two of this. Never treat a celebrity like they are some sort of god or goddess or king or queen. And Chris Widener talked about this yesterday on Facebook. He said people were upset because he would always get invited by famous people to be on stage and do stuff, and other people were like, "Well, they don't treat me at all the way they treat you." And he goes, "Well, how do you approach them? Do you approach them as if they're a king or a queen? Because if you go approach a celebrity as if they're a king or a queen, guess how they're going to treat you? They're
Mhm.
going to treat you like a servant. You're a servant, tremendous as it is. Uh, they're going to treat you like a servant. And I don't treat celebrities like servants. I'll never forget this. I was asked to MC a 4-day event, and they had a very famous baseball player giving a keynote address, and he was there every day, and we'd hang out backstage and MC. I am not a sports fan. I mean, I watch UFC fights, I watch the playoffs every year, the World Series, I watch the Super Bowl, but I don't follow any teams.
Mhm.
So I'm backstage. I don't know he's famous. And we get on the subject of jujitsu, and he goes, "What would you do if a guy did this?" And then I would grab him. I'd start to spin him around. And I wouldn't throw him to the ground hard, but I would just like throw him over, and he'd be like, "Wow," like we formed a camaraderie like a brother. And I would insult him. I would do, he's like a buddy, I would hit him in the arm. And on the last day when he gave the keynote, there's like a 40-foot long line down the hall. And I'm standing next to him. I go, "Is it like this all the time?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's always like this." And this was not a big event, Rob. This was 75 people. So this line, I'm like, wow, I didn't know you had so many fanboys. And he starts rolling laughing. And I got his phone number, and by the time I called him and had him on my show, I'm giving him a hard time while I'm talking to him, and we just have this banter now because I don't treat him any different than I would treat you or the president of the United States. I mean, I don't care that you're famous. I want to hear your story. I want to hear what drove you to be where you're at. And I got to tell you, I've had enough famous athletes on my show that lost all their millions to
Mhm.
tell you they're regular people, man. They
Yeah,
are regular people.
I was at an event where I guess it was $100 to stand and take a picture with this person. And I'm like, "No, I can take a picture right here. I don't need myself in it." And I think I was the only one who refused. And
Yeah.
later that day, he goes, I saw that you didn't come up and take a picture." I said, "Yeah, save my $100 and go get lunch or something." And he goes, he puts his arm around me and takes a selfie and he sends it to me. I'm like, "Oh, there you go." And I think sometimes they don't want to be treated as a
No,
commodity. They just
they don't.
they want to have a friend.
I have had every celebrity at the end of my interviews because I do my research, and I ask them that question no one else is asking them. And at the end, they always, always, always look right at the camera and go, "Brad, I would love to be invited back." And that's when you know you've done a good job.
Mhm.
That's when you know you've kicked them, you've challenged them, and you respect them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't, I'm not a jerk, but I'll just look at them, and I'll be like, "I love what you've done. I love the road that you've been on. I love that you overcame living in a van." And some of them they were living in a van.
Mhm.
Um, and if you do your research, oh my God, did they respect you?
Mm.
I had one guy on and I said, you did a TED talk where you had a choice between drama class and football, and you had a tough choice. And I let him talk, and he goes, Brad, you did your research. One guy I said, somebody told you when you were wandering across the United States, they said the road provides. That was the Wandering Monk episode. And he goes, man, you did research. That's your job. Do not mail it in. It
Mm.
is a disrespect to your guests. It makes you look like an amateur. And yeah, just treat your show as if it is an NBC primetime television show. Do
Yeah, and
not
ask the
compromise.
questions that the other people aren't asking, or and don't go, "Oh, in episode 3 of season 6, you said this. What does it?" They don't even fucking know. So
you know,
ask them stuff that they actually know.
Yeah, it's like try interviewing William Shatner and you go, in 1967, season 2, it's like they don't remember because they were memorizing lines every single week. They don't remember the previous week's episode. They discard it and they move on. And so you asking a dumb question like that, it's
It
just
just reminds
I
me of the
got to
movie Galaxy Quest. They're just
it does. It does. It does. It's exactly like that. Um I have to give a shout out to the late great Tom Cunningham, who gave me a lot of opportunities to work with celebrities when he had his podcast, Journeys to Success.
Mhm.
And God bless Tom because he had rheumatoid arthritis since he was 5. He had something like 6 hip replacement surgeries and 4 shoulders replaced. He was in bad shape and he was in such pain some days. He would just call me up and goes, "Hey Brad, I got to interview this person tomorrow. Can you help?" And I could literally hear the pain in his voice as he's asking questions. And he gave me an opportunity to interview Bruce Buffer on his show. And the reason he asked me is because I was training in Kempo Jiu Jitsu. I was in the ring and I was, doing that kind of martial arts training. He says, "You take over because you know this really well." He goes, "I'm a fan, but I don't know certain things." And I sat down for like 2, 3 days and just did all the research I could. But here's the thing, I want everybody listening who wants to be a host, don't do what Tom did, because as soon as he starts introducing Bruce, the first thing out of his mouth, he goes, "He's the most famous guest we've ever had on this show." And thank God Bruce wasn't on the line yet. He was calling in from somewhere. I just cringed. I yelled at Tom later. I go, "Don't ever do that." Because, and here's the reason why, you sound like an amateur when you do that. That's number one. And number two, you sound, "Oh my God, I'm intimidated by this person." Never be intimidated. I asked questions of Bruce Buffer and made a couple of mistakes. I asked about his father, and he goes, "No, that was my grandfather." And I was like, "Ah," and but I recovered. I kept coming back in. And the other thing that I want people to realize is that guest, that super famous guest you have one season, may not be that famous by season 8. uh, I've had milestone. I look at them as milestones. Okay, when I got Stephen M.R. Covey, uh, that was powerful. This is his father wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and I thought to myself, wow, this is a coup. I got this guy. Well, guess
Mhm.
what? He liked my interviews so much, he introduced me to his sister, who had just written a book, finished up the final opus of her father's last book that they were working on together.
Mhm.
And so when Stephen R. Covey died, she carried on the legacy. So I had her on the show like a month later. And so they will introduce you to one person after another. And that leads me to my next point, Rob. And that is, you're going to develop friendships in the podcasting world. And I want you to take those friendships seriously. So like you and I, Rob, we talk probably 2, 3 times a week. We just do the messenger thing.
Mhm.
But like Randall Kenneth Jones, I uh, was hanging out with Randall. Let's see, this was probably like 10 years ago, and we became friends. He was one of the keynote speakers, crushed it. He was incredible. And so he and I stayed in touch. And over about a year, I said, "Hey, I really would like Panache Desai on my show. Can you introduce me?" And he goes, "Sure." But I wasn't just going to ask him, I was going to give him a couple of guests first because I knew his guest roster outweighed mine at the time.
Mhm.
So I'm friends with Eartha Kitt's daughter, Kit Shapiro, and I just said, "Hey, I'll give you Eartha Kitt's daughter if you send me over the info for."
Trading cards.
uh right, yeah, so we're doing guest swapping. It's guest swapping. And so I got to talk to Panache Desai's wife, who did all his bookings back then, and I sent Randy, Kit. And so guest swapping is incredibly important. I'm good friends with Denise Griffiths, who has Your Partner in Success Radio.
Mhm.
And every once in a while, she'll reach out to me and she goes, "Hey, do you want this person on your podcast?" And she'll give me a description. And 9 out of 10 times, I'm like, "Yes, I would love that person." And that's how I got Stephen M. R. Covey and other guests. And then once in a while, she'll send me someone who's so weird and so bizarre or so arrogant that we both go, "Nah, we're going to pass on this one." So, um, you really have to start developing those connections. And then the third part of
You
this
know,
that has,
I've reached out to a
what's that?
lot of people over the years and invited them on the show, and I'm always kind of set back a little bit when someone says, um, "What's your show about?" Well, here's the website. Go check it out. Now, just tell me. And then they'll want to know statistics. Then they'll want to know this. They'll want to know,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Who the hell
Yeah.
are you? You're nothing famous. I just want you on the
Yeah.
show." And then I get a famous person, and they're like, "Okay, let's do it." It's like
Isn't
I
that
don't
the
ask
that's the
anything.
most That's the most hilarious part. I was in an Ancient Aliens Facebook group, and someone was talking about they wanted to meet Giorgio Tsoukalos, and I said I would love to interview him on my podcast. And some guy goes in, well, he doesn't do like private podcasts, like meaning you're this little thing. And then some other guy came in and goes, "Who have you really interviewed, Brad? Who?" And it's a beautiful thing after, 4 years of doing this, almost 5, to just go, "Well, I've interviewed," and I gave the roster, and the guy came back realizing, his snarky comment didn't get what he thought, and he was like, "Oh, so you interviewed nobodies?" I go, "Yep, nobodies." And some people are just they're never gonna be happy because
Yeah,
they're gonna see what you're doing as ego based, or or they're going to think you're this little tiny podcast. That's cute that you have a little show. um, Always build and strive to be bigger and better every single day. And I've watched you grow, Rob. Oh my god, the way you interview now is very different than that first one with Adam Homey. You have a
yeah,
different
and I'm a
style,
lot thinner too,
and you have better hair. Look at that. It's like
and
you
better
you've
teeth,
been
and yeah,
you've
it
been
just
working
keeps
out.
on.
Oh yeah, how'd that go? You had some teeth worked on last week.
Yeah,
How'd
I
that
had
go?
to. After the thing is after COVID, I got COVID 4 times. I mean, I got every flavor of COVID there was, and
COVID
it
light.
weakened my teeth. And,
Oh, wow.
the dentist's like, "Well, I haven't heard that." I'm like, "Bullshit. You were
Yeah,
referred to my dentist who's heard it, and you haven't heard it."
yeah,
Um,
it happens.
so, yeah,
Uh, y
I had 6 teeth rebuild up front, and,
Looking
it
good. Look at
it's
that smile.
people have come up to me and they said, "Well, Rob, have you lost weight? Are you sick?" Like, "I don't think I'm sick." "What do you know? What have you heard?"
That's funny.
So, I just go on. And the thing is that I've had customers, I've had friends who over the last year have said, "Rob, how do you keep going? The economy's shit. I'm down 80% from last year. What do you do? I mean, you're always constantly pushing out content." Yeah, yeah, I
How
am.
do you do
I,
it,
I
Rob
I'm I'm
Anspach?
I'm I'm doing 4 or 5 books a year for either myself or my clients. I'm putting out this podcast every week, and I'm cranking out. I think I have over 1,100 blog articles on my website, and then I'm putting blog articles on other people's websites. So it's yeah, you
It's tremendous. What
it
Rob
is.
is doing is
And the
tremendous.
thing is, for me, it's
He's the
just
greatest ever.
I
when it
only
comes
work
to
4 to 5
content.
hours a day, that's it.
Well, here's what I've learned, because I had somebody ask me this too. How do you do all the work for me and do a podcast? And it's simple. I know when I am the most productive when it comes to energy.
Mhm,
And so sometimes right after dinner, I get this spurt of energy and I'll start doing stuff and I'll get on my podcast, let's say. So, like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I'm usually editing a couple hours each night. Doing some episodes and I'm grabbing the graphics and I'm doing whatever. And then I'm working on client stuff a lot of times in the morning. So I'll get up, have a cup of coffee, and then I'll hit my studio right around, like 10 o'clock. And I'll start working on a couple of things. And when you know that you're only going to work 3 hours, let's say, or 4 hours, you really do your time management differently than when you know you're going to sit in your office for 8 hours.
mhm.
So, like, for those of you who are listening, Rob has his whole family living with him, I believe. He has his grandkids, he has his kids, he has his wife,
The
he has all
grandkids have
this.
moved out.
And all I'm picturing is him stepping over bodies in the morning, because everybody has their own sleeping bag or something. I
I
have
have a
my
big
own
house.
illusion. Yeah, so um, it basically, I believe you're in the basement. Am I correct? At
I'm
your
in the
studio,
dungeon.
in the dungeon.
I'm in the dungeon.
So I'm just sitting there, and I'm cracking up because sometimes Rob will just,
The
without announce,
commute to my office is
it,
horrible in the morning. I
it's
mean, from my
horrible.
bedroom to my office takes literally
I
at least 5
I
minutes, and
I
it's just horrible.
I I crack up because sometimes you'll just do an impromptu live. You'll call me on Messenger, and you're just are like, and your hair is way up in the air, and you're like, I go, oh, he did not sleep well last night.
No,
You
I
started
didn't sleep
cranking out
really last
content
night
at
either. I
2.
mean, you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're like, "Oh, shit, I got an idea. I gotta
Yeah.
go." I'm working
Well,
on another book for another client, right? And I had an idea, and I'm like, 'cause this guy was supposed to interview a bunch of people to put in his book, and I said 5 interviews at least. So,
yeah,
I had done an interview with him. He had done an interview with somebody else, and he had a 3rd one, so he needed 2 more. I'm like and he goes, "I can't get him. Nobody wants to be on my." I'm like,
ah,
"Alright, well, it's we need the content for the book." So what
yeah,
I did what I did is I made Rob's interview part 1, Rob's interview part 2, and then another person, Kira's interview part 1, Kira, and I split
that's
it up
funny.
and filtered it through the book, and he looks at it, and he goes, "Oh, that's brilliant." I'm like, "You gotta do what
Yeah.
you gotta do." But
You have to find a faster way to produce, content. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Rob is a master of this. Like, I'll be working on a little project for like 2 weeks, and Rob's already cranked out 3 books. And I'm like, how the hell do you do that? You
you
work
know,
so fast.
and if I'm 55, and I know you're, slightly a little older than me, but in
Yep.
high school, I was the worst at grammar. I was the worst at English. It's like,
Isn't that
I'm so
hilarious?
glad there's schools that go through and correct everything.
I was reprimanded for being too talkative, and now look what I do.
And
So I find that
I run into
hilarious.
classmates, and they're like, "You have a book publishing company?"
Oh, I know. It's hilarious.
And it just
Did
blows
you
their
see?
mind because they're like, "You can barely speak
Did you?
English in high school."
Did you see Nate, the comedian Nate Bargatze? He tells this great story. He evidently his high school has a Nate Bargatze golf outing, and he
Wow.
participates every year, and they raise money for charity. And so one of his classmates was there, not realizing something was disconnected in this guy's head because he walked up to Nate and he goes, "You are you still doing that comedy thing?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Is it working out? Is it?" And Nate's like, "Yeah, yeah, it's working out." Not realizing the tournament is named after him. This guy he went to high school with never saw his Netflix specials, I guess. I was just like, what? Um, and that, that is, it's par for the course. I have friends from high school don't know anything that I've done either. And I don't, that's fine. I'm still that small town kid, who used to pick his nose in third grade. I got beat up a couple of times, and was in drumline. I'm the same kid. So,
But,
and I think that,
I love the title of your podcast, Awaken Nation, especially in today's world of
yeah,
wokeness.
yeah.
We need
I,
to wake these people up, shake them around, slap
oh
them
yeah,
upside the head a few times, maybe drop
I
them some
had
steps if it really.
thanks. As you know, Rob and I share a similar job title, which is creative director. And what a creative director does is you oversee everything in a particular campaign. And so you see the bigger picture, you prep the art for it, the graphics. How are we going to reach people with this? It's books or it's podcast or whatever. And so, you sit back, and I sat there and I go, I wanted whatever I was gonna do to have the word nation in it. I knew that. And everybody kept telling me for like 5, 6 years, you gotta have your own podcast, man. And I'm like, what's it gonna look like? Because I didn't want to do it half-assed, as you know. You and I both we don't
Well,
do
back
anything
in
halfway.
2017, I co-wrote the book Power Guesting with Heather, and at the time, I didn't even have my own podcast, and
Yeah.
I thought, I need my own podcast. I need to have, and it is a lot of work, and I everybody cringes. At least I cringe at everybody else when they say, "I'm gonna start a podcast," and they get up to episode 3 and they're bailing out already, and I'm like, I'm up to 300 and some. Let's keep
Well,
going."
I'll tell you, I had a friend call me up and he said, "I'd like for you to be on my podcast." And this is a guy who used to work at like NBC, and he did PR for all these celebrities. And he was so nervous. He had his producer, his engineer, whoever it was, run the interview, and he was so like petrified. He couldn't ask me questions. Like I know him pretty well, so I can picture him on the other end of the phone, sweating.
Mhm.
I mean, I was just like, if that's how you're going to be, folks, don't do a podcast. You're going to have to challenge yourself. You're going to have to beat yourself up. I am my biggest critic ever. Sometimes I'm listening to my podcast over and over again, and people are like, why are you listening to your own voice? I am beating myself
Oh,
up.
you gotta get those
Um,
numbers up there. You gotta get let's
I know. Well,
let's
I'm
listen.
I'm listening to I'm listening to let's see. One of the ones I critique myself the most on was Brian Smith, who founded
Oh, yeah,
Uggs.
from, Uggs.
Yeah, and so the first time I interviewed him was on Cunningham's Journeys to Success, and I'm listening to my first interview, and all I kept thinking is, Brad, shut the hell up, because I talked way too much. So when I got into interviewing him for my show, Awakened Nation, I sat there and I went, I'm just going to ask these questions and let him talk.
Mhm,
And he resisted the main crux of his story. So I took him down that road because I knew the story.
mhm.
Um, and I think it came out to be one of my better
Well,
interviews
and
because it's like a
I've
master
heard
class.
Brian at a conference, and he shares that story probably 1,000 times a year, and I'm sure he gets tired of telling it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so when he gets on these podcasts, it's probably that he already knows the question, he already knows the answer. And sometimes, you
Yeah.
got to coerce these people to give you what you want. And I've learned over the
Yeah.
years, sometimes I have to listen. Sometimes I have to keep my mouth shut. Sometimes I have to interrupt. You have
And
to
some,
you have to learn to do the job that you've set out to do. If you want to be a podcaster,
yeah.
learn how to be a podcaster.
Yeah.
But
And
over the years, I've
some
learned to be a book producer, a podcaster, a speaker, a marketer. I'm learning
s-
all these things as I go.
And don't be afraid of making mistakes. As Rob's talking, I'm sitting here going, I realize sometimes a guest will say something, and I go on Google and look it up,
Mhm.
some of what they did so I can add details to it. Or I have to read their book, and I only got the book the day before we're supposed to interview. So I have to do the research. But I wanted to get back a little bit to naming a podcast. I see a lot of people out there who they've named their podcast, they're really proud of it, but they're not a creative director. So you can see that that naming convention or the idea they came up with has a 3-year run.
Hmm.
It's never going to be a 20-year run. So when I sat down to do my podcast, at the time I had a business partner, and I just started throwing out words that I liked, and she just wrote them down on a whiteboard. And I said, I want to talk to people. I don't want to have a business conversation. I want to have a conversation where the person talks about their epiphany.
Hmm.
Alcoholism destroyed their life, or they lost both their legs and they still built a multi-million-dollar business. How do you do that? I mean, I wanted to have deep conversations, deep dive, into this. So one of the things I've always prided myself in is my mission statement, which is to ignite game-changing conversations. That's always been my favorite mission statement. And I said, so what would that be? Well, I wanted to talk to people who woke up.
Hmm.
So I didn't, it's not woke. Woke is, that started in the Black community amongst Black women who wanted to talk about, you know, social society issues that were affecting them. And then it got spread to Hollywood and everybody else, and they just hijacked it. So woke is, way out there. For those of you who are listening who may not agree with that, just look around at the chaos in our country right now. This is
Hmm.
caused by wokeism. But awake is very different. An awakened nation isn't just about borders and land, it's about people's consciousness that they've awakened to something bigger. And then the tagline just came, it just flowed right off my tongue. I mean, it can take a month sometimes to come up with names and go through all this stuff. This was 20 minutes. Awakened Nation, a deep dive into the extraordinary. That's the tagline. And I was like, I can't believe, I have 40 years of experience doing this. And I went, boom, 20 minutes. I went, holy crap, could it be that easy? And it was like the universe was resonating with what I wanted to do. And I'm a firm believer that's why I get some of the guests I do, because I didn't try to get Belinda Carlisle. It happened because I formed these relationships over the years, and somebody from, I got introduced to a managing agent who helps celebrities get booked on podcasts. And I get phone calls, I get emails, I get all kinds of these management companies now. They've
Hmm.
seen the quality of my show. They don't care about the numbers. They just like my interview style. And when they recommend me to their client base, they all leap forward and they go, I want to be on that guy's show, because
Hmm.
Awakened Nation makes them go, whoa. And they'll send a sample episode, or they send my sizzle reel. And it has a lot of the celebrities I've had on the show. And all of a sudden that celebrity leans forward and goes, I have to be on that guy's show. And I've had these celebrity management companies call me from Australia, Germany, England, and say, "Hey, could you get my dude on your show, man?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah!" So I've had people on my show from Australia, Israel, Germany, England, Canada. I'm listened to in 85 countries now, including Croatia and Nigeria. And I'm like, how in the hell did a small town kid who was in drumline wind up doing this?
Yeah, I mean,
And I pinch myself every day.
I love getting guests from Australia, from Norway, from
Oh,
UK.
they swear right out of the gate. That's the first thing an Australian does.
And it's yeah, and I'm like, okay, they're 13 hours ahead. What time I got to schedule this, and I got to do math, and I got to figure this all out. But the podcasts usually turn out great. They pay
They do.
attention. They're there to, granted, we're Americans. We have our hand gestures, and we're doing this. It's like we're swatting flies, and they're just
Yeah, I
staying
had
there.
Bo,
No
Bo,
emotion through the whole thing, but it's a great
I
podcast.
I had Bodie Aldridge on my show, and Bodie is leading the male masculine movement down in Australia for executives. Men of a certain age who are kind of hitting a wall, and they go, I compromised everything to build a business. Now I don't know who I am or what I am. So he takes them out on the beach, lights a fire, and he's like, all right, gents, we're gonna talk, and they go surfing, they do all kinds of fun stuff. And then I got another one from actually a different management company. Gina Dang was on my show, and Gina, her family came to Australia from Vietnam in a little boat in, I guess it was 2001. And here they are years later. They are one of the largest strawberry farms in the country, and they have the brand Gina's Table, which is these dehydrated snacks for kids, and they're beautifully packaged. They sent me a box, and I ate them all before the show started. It's like I can't put these down; they're addictive. So when we finally did the show, I had one bag left. It's like, I just, like you, I always am like, I'm looking for that elusive competitive edge, which is found in my guests. It's not me. A lot of people think it's me and I'm driving this and look at me, Brad. No, that's why I don't put my face on any of my artwork. It's always the guest. And I learn from my guests. I learn so much. And I think I come away extraordinarily changed from some of these people because some of them have been through hell and back. I had a woman on who's her son um, tried to commit suicide at 10 years of age. I mean, how do you talk to somebody like that? How did they recover? And how did they get their son back on track?
Mhm.
Um, Colleen Greco, she became a joyologist, she calls herself. And I thought to myself, these are extraordinary conversations. Dina Mitchell, she's another one, a good friend of mine. She's been through hell and back. Rape survivor, I had on a guy who took a revolver to his head, pulled the trigger, and shot a bullet through his brain. And somehow a voice in his head said, "Get up, go upstairs, call the paramedics." And he did. And when he got to the hospital, and eventually months later, he told the doctor what he had done. They said, "That's impossible. You blew your brains out," and somehow lived. He still has the bullet in his head. Um, he had to learn to re-walk and do all kinds of stuff, but he realized, he had to change his life. So I have people on who they're just regular people you might see online at the local coffee shop, and you would never know that they've had this extraordinary story in them that it makes you cry. I mean, I've cried at some of my
Yeah,
guests.
and that's why, I bring on people on this show is I understand their superpower,
Yeah,
and sometimes more than they do. I've had people on here. Typically, I try to have entrepreneurs on the show, but you know, I've had people that I thought were going to be brilliant. They were working for someone else. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to interview them, see where it goes.
yeah,
And at the end of the interview, I said, I don't think you're going to be sticking around your job for much longer. Your brand, your personality is so powerful. You're either going to get fired or you're going to quit and you're going to start your own thing. And now I'm helping that person write their book. For because the
yes,
last 2 years they've gone out and done speaking. They've done all kinds of great stuff. Sometimes
yeah.
we as entrepreneurs, because we've been in the trenches long enough, we can
Yeah.
see the power someone has inside them, and we need it to come out.
It's so true, and it's such a joyous feeling when you can help somebody. But I've seen what you see. Sometimes um, you'll see somebody who is extraordinarily talented. They have an amazing energy, and they're a beautiful person inside and out. And you tell them that, and they cringe, like you've just swore at them, and they're not used to that. And I realize it's for a lot of people, it's self esteem. They have
Mhm.
very low self-esteem, or they've been told their whole life, "Why would anybody listen to you?"
And I
And
think I was at that point too, and becoming an entrepreneur back in a full-time entrepreneur in 1995. Now I had been an entrepreneur prior to that, 6 years prior, and that business crashed and burned. I went back to work for someone. So,
yeah,
1995, I became a full-time entrepreneur again, and it's almost been 30 years. And
Isn't it amazing
you
when you
know,
look back?
it's I've I've gotten more confident as I've gotten older, but I've also realized that there's certain clients I don't want. I don't want the hassle. But the thing is, even when I try to be nice to somebody, that whole phrase, "No good deed goes unpunished," it always comes back to bite me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It reminds me on the highway when you let somebody in because 'cause they're waiting to merge into traffic, and then they always, I swear to God, they drive either too slow or they don't do something, and you're like, "Why did I leave them in? When am I gonna learn this lesson of not helping my fellow man on the highway?" Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I've watched the work you do, and we're both part of the Mutual Admiration Society. We see each other's work and we kind of go, "Damn, that is good. How'd you do that?" Uh, I'm just amazed at how much content you put out, and I want anybody who's listening to to your show, Rob, I want them to
you were gonna
understand.
say shit
Uh, what's that?
before you said listening to your show. You were gonna say shit.
Yeah.
Listening to your shit.
Listening to your show. I said show, I swear to God. They shot me. They shot me, but I dodged the bullet. I'm Neo. I'm the chosen one. Um, I shot him. The cameras turned. They didn't show that I killed him. Um, anyways, what I wanted to say real quick, as Christopher Walken, those of you who are listening and you have your own little agency or you're doing the work, some of what you do is not going to have a direct payoff.
Mhm.
It's not going to have a direct monetary payback, okay, like this podcast. But I can tell you this, I have extraordinary clients that I help do branding for. I help them write their books. I do what Rob does a little bit. He does more of the social media management part, which I it's all voodoo to me, it's magic. I don't
Gotta
know
be
how he does
voodoo.
it.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's let
And
me
without
interject here
cats.
for a second because I want to tell you
They're
some.
eating
Yeah,
cats. Yeah, sorry.
I posted something on Facebook, and Facebook then will share it to Instagram and then share it to Threads.
Oh
I
Lord.
swear that everybody who got rejected off of Facebook and Instagram is over there on Threads now. So
Oh
I
Lord.
posted something on Facebook, crickets. Nobody responded. I'm thinking, okay, whatever. And I deleted it. Well, I didn't delete it off Threads because I don't think about Threads. So then I get a
Right.
notification. You got nine. It says nine notifications from Threads. I'm like, oh, okay. Let me check what's going on. It wasn't nine. You fucking shit. There was 200 comments, all negative about the post I just made. And I'm thinking, who the hell's on Threads? Who cares?
Yeah, nobody, I love when Facebook says, yeah, your friend Dave just made a comment on Threads, and I'm like, I don't care. I mean, it's another platform that's gonna fail.
Yeah,
Hello.
and it's like, and all these people are like, "Are you stupid?" And I'm like,
Uh,
again, who the hell's on Threads?
it's the angriest people in the world are on Threads.
Yeah,
They
and
migrated
actually,
over.
they're hanging by
Insanity.
a thread.
They shot me. They shot me. Sorry. They're eating cat.
And it's like,
Cats and the dogs.
and
Yeah,
I looked at that, and I just laughed, and I was going to comment on a few of them. I thought, I just let them keep posting.
that's funny.
It's my most, it's my most responded post on Threads. So it's like,
I love when you get accidental traction and it's nothing but anger. It's hilarious. What are you, an idiot? It's like going into one of those fringe groups, like Ancient Aliens or the Tartarian Empire or whatever, and you just go, I believe that there was a roof on this building, and all the science guys come in and go, "What are you, an idiot? There's no proof," and you're like, "Oh, for the love of God."
so I
So I
just
mean,
let it go. I'm thinking,
it's it's like just go into any like DC comic group and you're going to be
oh,
laughing.
and and
You're
and
grown
halfway
men
through,
in their 30s.
I'm reading these comments, and halfway through, it goes from it goes from insulting me as a person to, "Oh, he must be a Republican."
I know,
What
and
does
they
one
think
have
they're
to do with
insulting you.
the other?
They think they've hurt you. Or
Yeah.
my favorite is they put the laugh emoji on something very serious that we all need to worry about, and it's just, oh, it's ridiculous. But getting back to what I was saying, uh, I have clients that once they work with me, I have this amazing platform to
Mm.
interview them, and that helps promote their book, and then I put my podcast on their website. So
And a lot of
I
these
work with
episodes that I've made with people have
yeah,
become content in their book,
yeah.
you
I'm
know?
gonna take
Oh, it's
my
like
best.
the unscripted, unfiltered, on Woo Woo and on Guru is just 7 episodes of me and Steve Gamlin. It's in the book.
Oh,
Empath
he's great. I love
The
Steve.
Empathetic, Lawyer, it contains my episode with Ted Tedford, and there's an episode with the Hollywood, or Navigating Hollywood with me and Jonathan Thompson, and,
There you go.
it's people love to have a book where, okay, it gives them a little bit of education, but then goes into dialogue. Because now
Yeah,
they feel
yeah.
like they're just sitting in a room listening to 2 people. Yes, they have to read it, but,
It
the brain comprehends it, I think, better,
yeah.
the conversation that's in it.
Who who's been your favorite guest? And I know it's definitely Adam Homey. I love talking to Adam, because he's very direct and to the point. He's very much a
Well,
conservative.
one of my favorite, was, Les Hewitt, who's Canadian,
Oh,
who was
yeah,
also the co-author, with Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield, um, he was just, for me, it was kind of a hero because I'm reading his books, you
yeah,
know, and he's these books have been transcribed and made into, you know 50 different languages, 100 different languages, whatever it was, and
yeah,
they sold 200 million copies, and I'm like just in awe. But we go back to this, non-hero worship, and I treated him just like a regular person, and he
yeah.
respected me better for it.
I think that's the only way you can get a good interview. No matter how famous a person is, I do a little research, so that I can open it up where I just kind of go, how did you deal with the death of your son? And then they're like, oh, that was rough. And I said, I don't want to go any deeper. I know that's a painful subject. And then we move on. But people want to hear that you've done your homework, and they also want to hear that you asked a question no one else is asking. So Belinda Carlisle, I sat for probably about a week trying to figure out what I was going to ask her. And so I actually reached out to a couple of friends, and then I watched some documentaries, and then I sat back and I said, I have to ask her about her drug addiction, because you can't just suddenly go, oh, here she is, doing all this amazing work over in India with the Animal People Alliance. And so I had to segue, and then I wrote all my questions out in a chronological order. And you know what's the funniest part, Rob? You probably do this too. I felt after that first question, I kinda freestyled, and I went to the 3rd question, and then back to the 2nd, and then
Yeah,
down to
I
5,
don't
and
I don't write my questions down, and because I don't want to be prepared either. I go where the conversation goes,
yeah,
and so mentally I might have a question that I want to ask, but maybe it just doesn't fit. So I wait
yeah,
and I wait, and
yeah,
if it doesn't come up, it doesn't come up. But
right.
sometimes I have to pivot and go a different direction because I know that's where the conversation's going.
I only write the questions down for guests that are, like, very famous, and there's definitely this direction that we have to go in. So, like, getting back to Belinda, I knew we had to talk about how did she get into yoga after she was on a cocaine bender for 3 days in a hotel? How does that leap happen? You know? And then, the other thing I do, and you've been a victim of this, I love asking a lightning round of questions at the end that get them to talk about things they don't usually talk about. And sometimes those questions will come during the interview. Like I'm listening to somebody talking about, maybe they're really, really a beautiful, wonderful soul who doesn't seem to get angry. And I'll ask them directly, what pisses you off? And sometimes I have to think, about it. Or one I had Larry Levine on, and he was very succinct, and this is how you do things, and blah blah blah. And at the end, I said, "What's your favorite superhero? Who's your favorite superhero?" He literally couldn't answer that. It was great. He goes, I'm gonna go with Superman." I said, "No, it's Batman. You have to say Batman every time." And so I just, some of those lightning round questions actually got formed by accident. I was trying to come up with a really great question, and I asked it in the wrong way accidentally. And it came out, "What's your favorite memory?" And I know that sounds like, well, how could that be an accident? But it was.
Hmm.
And that has become my favorite go to question at the end.
Yeah.
That and, what do you do that no one knows that you do?
And, you know,
you know,
and it's not that we're doing these podcasts to be famous. For me,
yeah,
it's always been about educating, the listeners.
yeah,
But, when I look back on some of the people that I've interviewed that have died, Joe Sugarman, he wasn't on a Heroes podcast. He was on a podcast I did prior to that back in 2010. And that was a short-lived podcast. I think I interviewed 20 people. That was it. But
yeah,
I'm glad that I had the opportunity to interview them. You know,
yeah,
people are like, "Wow, that person
yeah,
died," and they didn't get to share their
yeah,
information. Yes, they did on my podcast. Wanna have a look? Listen? I was, and it's every anniversary of Joe Sugarman's, death, I share out that episode again for people to listen. And
yeah.
people are like, "Wow, Rob, I didn't know that you did this. This is awesome." And,
That is.
but
Well,
we're running out of time, and I like to
I
sit
know.
here and talk for hours, but
You and
where
I
can
could.
people find you? Where can they find the podcast?
Just, Google "Awakened Nation." You
No,
can
we
go
don't
to
do
the web.
Google.
Yeah, or, do a search on this thing called the internet, or you can go to the website, which is awakenednationpodcast.com. And I'm all the platforms. I'm astounded, when I got on iHeartRadio, I was like, "Woohoo,"
Mhm.
but I'm on
And
Pandora.
funny was iHeart had me on when I first got the episode started. I think I had like 20 episodes, and iHeart put a placeholder, and I'm like, "Oh, this is great! I'm on iHeart," and it
I
disappeared.
know.
What?
I know. You get
And
excited
then
over
it was like
little
a
things.
year later they finally got me back on.
I was excited when I was on, Audible and Amazon Prime. I just was like, "Oh, oh, I'm somebody now." But,
I've been
yeah,
putting everything on YouTube just so it's searchable now, and it's on video, and a lot of the podcast channels are merging into each other, and the links are
yeah,
changing, and
all I know is, what is that ranking, group that's online? They rank you. I'm in the top 5% of podcasts globally around the world. Woohoo! But yeah, I have fun with that. Uh, yeah, I just I'm like you. I love the interview, and I guess in closing, my dream interview would be Christopher Walken. I hate to say it, it would just be like, "Brad, wow, I love your show. It's amazing. Have you ever been to Vietnam?" "No, I haven't, Chris." "Well, it's hot." You know. So,
and then you have to have
uh,
them dance on the show too, because
yes, I'm an old hoofer from way back. Um, he did an interview. I think it was on Letterman or Jay Leno, one of those. Where they said, "What would be the ultimate thing for you?" And he goes, "I would love a cooking show where people came on who imitated me while we cooked." He goes, "Because I actually don't know they're imitating me, and I think it would be a hoot." He kind of was like, I was like, "That is genius." Could you see Christopher Walken with his own cooking show? you wanna get the broth just right.
It would take forever. I'd be like, "I don't have
Oh,
time."
we're chopping the I remember this one scene I did with Natalie Wood as he's chopping vegetables, it's, like, really slow. You know, eh, I loved Natalie and her husband, we didn't get along, as you know. You just tell these offbeat stories. You
Well,
know,
there you go, folks.
Frankenstein
Wait
Frankenstein never scared me.
just, wait until he gets Christopher Walken on his podcast, and then you can subscribe to his channel,
There you go.
awakennationpodcast.com.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate having you
Adios.
on. All right,
See
you
you in the
having
next
me on.
episode.